Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. I'm Richard Ponzio, Director of the Global Governance, Justice, and Security Program at the Stimson Center, and along with our partners, the Doha Institute Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, the West Asia North Africa Institute, and the American University of Beirut, we're delighted and thankful to welcome all of you to this forum on the theme of Middle Eastern perspectives on taking forward the UN75 Declaration. While our talented moderator of this session, Ms. Miriam Namazi, anchor of Al Jazeera English's flagship NewsHour program, will soon set the stage for today's forum and introduce our 7 remarkable panelists, let me first briefly note that in March, we convened with several other partners a similar kind of dialogue on European perspectives on taking forward the UN75 Declaration, in addition to a 6-part roundtable series this past February through May on fulfilling the UN75 Declaration's promise. The synthesis reports from both of these initiatives can be accessed in the chat box function for today's program. Finally, on Thursday, June 24th, so a little over 2 weeks from today, on the first of the 3-day annual meeting of the Academic Council on the UN System, or ACANS, we will launch together with several partners, including ACANS, the Plataforma CIPO in Brazil, and Leiden University out of the Netherlands, a new global governance innovation network, which will bring together world-class scholarship with international policymaking to address fundamental global governance challenges, threats, and opportunities. Details on how to register for the ACANS annual meeting and participate in the activities of the Global Governance Innovation Network can be found also in the chat box for today's program. And now it is my pleasure to turn the screen over to Miriam Namazi, and we thank all of you once again for participating in today's discussion. Miriam.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We have everyone with us now. Yes, as Richard was saying, it is a pleasure to be with you all today. I am joining you from London. And I'm delighted to be able to moderate today's event, Middle Eastern Perspectives on Taking Forward the UN75 Declaration from Reflection, Innovation, and Action. I think there's quite a lot to unpack just in the title itself there, but thankfully that task doesn't fall to me. We have, as Richard was saying, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today, rich in diversity and across different areas of expertise and age groups, which is also very important when we speak about diversity and inclusivity within the United Nations. I want to welcome colleagues today who are joining us from across the Middle East and North Africa. It's a pleasure to have you, and really welcome to everyone, wherever you happen to be joining us from, for this conversation that couldn't be happening at a more important time, really. You know, the Middle East is a part of the world that is very close to my heart, and I'm very privileged and very fortunate to be able to focus on stories in the region which we endeavor to cover with a bit more depth, hopefully context, analysis, to foster a greater understanding of this fascinating place, its history, all of its different languages, the values and aspirations and the identities of its people. And of course, we know that the UN75 milestone came at a time of great disruption for the world, not just because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the social and the economic effects of that, but also because of the long-standing political rivalries and the tensions that have held back or stifled a multilateral approach to these challenges. In the Middle East, we've seen continuing conflict in Syria, in Yemen, instability in Libya and Iraq, and then of course most recently there was the war in Gaza. But important to say that it's not just about the violence, which is what we hear about most often in regards to the region. It's also about a widespread denial of basic rights and freedoms, the repression of civil society, and perhaps the thing that really continues to feed and fuel all of that is this this culture and politics of impunity that accompanies those violations. But this is also a region where millions of people are stuck in a cycle of poverty, sadly, in many cases despair, and perhaps the worst thing of all, a sense of hopelessness. People don't have access to basic things like education, healthcare, even sanitation and nutrition and clean drinking water. I mean, these are all issues that probably don't get the attention that they deserve. So we are talking about entire populations that are incredibly vulnerable in many places. We often hear about armed conflict in the Middle East, but not so much about the long-term effects of poverty and inequality, and also the psychological toll that takes on a society and the subsequent generations, the youth, the effect that has on people. And of course, these are some of the issues that the United Nations has been grappling with 75 years after it was founded, with a mandate to uphold peace, security, justice, and equality. I hope today that we can have a clear and honest discussion about the flaws, the failures, the shortcomings, and where change and innovation is possible, if not necessary. I think it's very easy to criticize the United Nations, but I think you could argue that the world would be in a much worse place if it didn't exist. We need this multilateral system to work now more than ever if we have any hope in tackling the issues that I mentioned just now, but also anything from the pandemic to climate change. Right, so with that in mind, the purpose of today's event is to propose concrete ideas and inclusive strategies from the Secretary General to consider for his forthcoming Our Common Agenda report, and recommendations to realize the UN75 declaration's full potential with a focus on the Middle East, and secondly, to identify pathways and international actors responsible for advancing the UN75 declaration's vision and individual commitments, dealing with the unique capabilities, ideas, and networks within the Middle East and North Africa to advance that declaration. Let me just check something here. Okay, fantastic. We have the ambassador there. Ambassador, I will come to you in just a moment. I just want to run through the plan for today. It is fluid, but I want to give you an idea of what to expect over the next hour and a half, the next 90 minutes. We're going to divide our time into three main segments. I will be speaking to the ambassador very shortly for his views on really some of the key challenges that I was just talking about in the Middle East. So we'll do that for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to broaden the discussion out into a second segment. We will be joined by several more speakers from the region. And then the last and final leg of the program today is the Q&A. And I say that's the final bit, but I do encourage all of you to get your questions in now. You can do that using Zoom's Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function. This is really important, not just because I want to connect with all of you and I want to understand your thoughts and opinions on the things that we're going to be talking about on the discussion, but also because this is a global conversation. We want it to be inclusive. We want it to be interactive. It's a great way for us to connect and hopefully enhance our understanding. So please do get your questions in and don't hold back. When you do submit those questions, please kindly say your name If you have any organizational company affiliation, do let us know. And then, of course, who you wish to pose your question to. Just a little housekeeping reminder. Just a little housekeeping reminder that the speakers that are joining us for the second part of the discussion, if you could make sure that your camera and your audio is switched off for the duration for this first 30 minutes. And then obviously when we start the second part of the program and I introduce you, I will bring you in, and then I definitely want to see and hear you for that, very important. So thank you very much. Let's get going with the first segment. And in the first segment, I'm joined by Her Excellency Sheikh Ali Ahmed bin Saif Al Thani, Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar to the United Nations. I also have His Excellency Mahmoud Daifallah Hamoud, Ambassador of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan to the Republic of Singapore and a former Deputy Permanent Representative of Jordan to the United Nations. So it is a pleasure to have you both. And I think you're both on mute. So Sheikh Alia and Ambassador Hamoud, if you could come off mute. I think you are. Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So thank you both for joining us for this first part of the discussion. And Sheikh Alia, perhaps I'll kick things off with you, because you co-facilitated the UN75 declaration negotiations last year alongside your colleague, Ambassador Anna Karin Enström of Sweden. What would you say are the declaration's most important contributions to the future work of the United Nations, and specifically what role can civil society and the business community play in taking this agenda forward?
Thank you so much, Mariam, for this opportunity. And of course, let me begin by thanking the co-sponsors of this event today, the Stimson Center, the Doha Institute, Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, and other great co-sponsors as well. Of course, this is a very good question to start with. I've been privileged to been appointed to co-facilitate the drafting and negotiating the UN75 declaration together along with my colleague, the Ambassador of Sweden last year. And of course, that process happened in a very difficult time where we have all grappled and with the beginnings of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was a great opportunity for us to be able to come up with a declaration really that is that serves the purpose and addresses many challenges that will face us today and ahead in the future. So to address your specific question on how this process has begun and unfolded, of course, we've drafted and negotiated the declaration at a point of time where we had to come up with a process that fits to purpose. And of course, just let me focus on two aspects that the declaration most important contributions to the future work of the United Nations. And let me begin by saying that first, I believe that the one of the contribution is the depiction of the willingness and commitment of member states to work together to solve some of the world's most pressing issues. So the declaration's 12 action points builds upon and complement one another, providing a roadmap for action across the agenda. The 12 action points that consists of within the declaration, member states commit to strengthen cooperation and to boost partnerships, engaging both nations and from all generations. Another important contribution is the declaration's positive messages that the post-COVID-19 world provides an opportunity for the world to come together to address huge problems such as inequality, climate change, health for all, digital trust, and security. So these are some of the areas that used to bring about a lot of differences among nations, but yet the commitment to work together to build better and greener came very much visible into the process. However, we of course need new tools, ideas and initiatives and partnerships. And here comes the key role of civil society organizations and the private sector. We have seen over the past years the enormous solidarity and how innovative kinds of public-private partnerships have managed to respond to the various socio-economic impact, development of vaccines, among so many others. So, Mariam, I just wanted to end on the note that I think the UN75 declaration really gave a very clear-cut commitment at a very, very difficult time. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has showed us that global cooperation and solidarity is a must. COVID-19 has hit every single country, rich or poor, developed or developing. It has hit us equally in a way that we have to respond in a matter of solidarity and cooperation. And I think the production of vaccines, the distribution of vaccines has shown a lot the responsibility that we have all shared. For example, the state of Qatar has played an important role in making sure that we do not serve only our nations, but we serve others. We providing vaccines to other nations, helping in the distribution of vaccines to other nations. I think this is the essence of what we are suffering from today. And I think this is what is reflected in the declaration, the clear-cut commitment that we need to work together. Without it, we will never be able to beat the COVID-19 pandemic or even, God forbid, future crisis and future pandemics. And I'll stop here.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I think there is an important message there in terms of the pandemic, because we have seen this is definitely a virus that thrives on inequity. And we have seen many countries turning inwards in terms of vaccine hoarding, and particularly international meetings taking place this week that will address important issues around wealthier countries donating to the developing world, because of course that important message that no one is really safe until we are all safe from this virus. And I'm then curious actually to get your thoughts on this, Ambassador Hammoud, because tell me about the situation. Tell me about the situation there in Jordan, and how do you have concerns about the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic sort of affecting or weighing on political, social, economic development in the region? I know there isn't a great deal of epidemiological and public data that is published on the effect of COVID in the Middle East, but what can you tell me about Jordan's experience?
I would like to thank you, Ms. Namazi, and also the Stimson and the Doha centers for organizing this event on the Middle East perspective and taking forward UN75 declaration. I hope the discussions will contribute to a more proactive engagement between the UN and all stakeholders in the region towards addressing the challenges it faces in achieving the goals of peace, security, and development for all. Going back to your questions about Jordan, the situation, obviously, like any other country that faced COVID, we had a first wave and then a second wave, but thankfully now the number of cases have been receding. The severe economic impact on the country has been stark because of the closure of institutions of public and civil sectors, as well as private institutions. We are trying to recuperate, and we're trying to work with other partners in trying to secure more opening of the different sectors in Jordan. Unfortunately, as an observer from outside Jordan, being based in Singapore, you can see that there was uneven response by the international community. The loopholes and the gaps that exist in the international system. And unfortunately, the UN system in dealing with the pandemic have been very apparent. The problem is that access to the equipment, to the preventive equipment, as well as testing and now to vaccine has not been even. It's unfortunate because some regions will be able to start their economies much faster than the others, and that will widen the gap. Widen the gap between the rich and poor. And we're not here talking only about within a society, but between nations. So this will be more obvious once the pandemic finishes. But I hope that we learn from it and we try to strengthen the UN system and the global multilateral system and having more harmonious response that puts burden sharing at the forefront of how the United Nations deals with future pandemics. And it is not if, it is when. And there is near uncertainty among scientists that what pandemic X, as they call it, is coming in a few years. I hope I'm not being pessimistic in this, but it looks like it's going to happen. So the best thing is to be able to learn from our lessons. The WHO now is looking into its strategies to strengthen international cooperation, monitoring, responses, support, and other organizations are too. WIPO in Geneva, World Intellectual Property Organization, with regard to the vaccines and the issue of patents, is also looking into the matter. But also it shows something about us, and that at the end of the day, everything is local. And I think our perspective should go beyond that and believe that when I support the other country or the other person, I'm supporting myself.
Well, exactly. As you say, if we're going to tackle these challenges, then it can't just be about self-interest. There has to be probably a massive paradigm shift in the way we think about these things. Ambassador Hammoud, I want to ask you about it. So much to say about the pandemic, but Jordan has a unique perspective on this issue. So I do want to ask you about developments in the region in recent weeks. As you know, another flare-up of violence in Israel and the occupied territories, with devastating consequences for civilians, and especially those in Gaza, where there is a humanitarian crisis still. We are 75 years in on the question of Palestine. The Security Council, as you well know, has passed multiple resolutions. Most of them haven't been implemented or respected. How is this impunity and disregard for Security Council resolutions, how has that affected the reputation, not just of the Security Council, but the United Nations itself?
Thank you. I had some notes to speak from, but I'll speak directly to your question. This conflict, people think it started with Gaza. It did not start with Gaza and the Israeli military operation there. It started with a very small scale process of settlement and eviction. This is the eviction of Sheikh Jarrah residences. The Palestinians were for years trying to battle in Israeli courts against the eviction. Settlers and settler movements have been trying for decades now to take over their homes. And it's part of a systemic process of settlement. And that the violence started from there. Settlements are against international law. They're international crime. Eviction, the displacement of civilians from occupied territory, from their homes, is international crime too. But apparently all these rules are disregarded because the international community does not enforce the rule of international law and what the Security Council said as recently as the end of 2015 on the illegality of settlement. And that's what started it. And what followed is incursions, repeated incursions into Al-Haram al-Sharif and Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israeli forces, again, through a systematic process by which to create a new status quo into the holy shrines, the Muslim holy shrines in Jerusalem. It's creeping annexation process, which will continue unless the international community takes a stand against these unlawful activities. If we don't, the cycle of violence will continue. People thought, well, the Palestinian issue, look what happened in Syria, look what happened in Iraq, the Arab Spring. So it's a marginal issue. You have other core problems in the Middle East. Maybe if you tackle them, you will not be talking about the Palestinian issue as the core of stability in the Middle East and peace. But that incident that started a spiral of violence, if it weren't for interventions that took place, which put pressure to have a ceasefire, this would have spiraled for further consequences that would have been unforeseen. We should stop this, and we should try to stop this.
Sorry, Ambassador, can I just quickly ask you, you're referring to interventions from
the United States, from the EU, from us, from Jordan, from the Egyptians, the Egyptian government. I think this put pressure and showed, the Israeli government that, it is not without consequences. These policies. If there is somebody who can always say through the international community, through the UN and the others, that there are benchmarks and there are roadmaps by which certain measures can be measured. If you have certain CBMs that can be between the parties for a certain period of time until the parties can go back and resume negotiations for a peaceful settlement based on a two-state solution. It will remain the only solution. One-state solution will not happen. It's unimplementable. One state cannot keep dominating another people in perpetuity. The two-state solution is, again, the only solution, a Palestinian state based on the 1967 lines with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is the only viable option. So if you're asking me how the Security Council should react, I think the Security Council should tell the parties, these are things that you have to do to build trust among you. You should then sit together and with all other stakeholders, the United Nations, Russia, the Quartet, the EU, should support the process of direct negotiation between parties to resolve the final status issues, and then the United Nations through the Secretary General and the UN Special Coordinator should monitor the situation and report back to the Security Council in this regard. We cannot view this. Yes, please go ahead.
Indeed, and I'd love to pick your brain a bit more on that, but you touched on something important, which I want to ask Sheikh Alia about now, because it is the UN Security Council, isn't it, that lies at the heart of the global security architecture. It's the UN's most powerful body charged with maintaining peace and security. Its resolutions are binding, and yet in many cases, it's failed to protect civilians in the Middle East and North Africa. I know that you are currently co-chairing the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. Is there any hope for reform?
Thank you so much, Mariam. And of course, Ambassador Mahmoud touched upon the centrality of the role of the Security Council. And yet again, going back to the UN75 declaration, where we have touched upon the centrality of the UN reform aspects, including the Security Council. And I recall the process when we were negotiating the phrasing and the language on how to refer to the reform aspect of the Security Council, and we've managed to reach consensus on the term instilling new life in the reform of the Security Council. And of course, our head of states and governments have endorsed this aspect of the declaration. And of course, again, I'm privileged to have the opportunity this year to co-facilitate the intergovernmental negotiations on the reform of the Security Council alongside my colleague, the former ambassador of Poland, Ambassador Joanna Veronica, which is now actually the currently is the UN Secretary General Coordinator to Lebanon. We had an excellent engagement this year with member states. There was a lot of enthusiasm when the process has started. Again, there is a lot of interest to move this process forward. It has been lagging behind for the last probably 13 years since the current format of the well-known IGN process has begun in 2007, and yes, we are this discussion has prolonged for years, and it is time to give life to it and instill new life to it. So Mariam, addressing your question, if there is hope, there is always hope. I think this year there was a lot of enthusiasm. We've noticed that in the negotiations, as for example, in the initial debate of the process, we had around 80 countries participating in the debate. It's been said that it is the highest in years. We've been able to accomplish a lot to move the process forward on the known 5 clusters that we discuss within the IGM process. Of course, the well-known 5 clusters to many are the regional representation, the categories of membership, the question of the veto, the size of an enlarged Security Council, and of course, the relationship between the General Assembly and the Security Council. So yet again, what is the problem with the format today? The format today lacks the regional representation, the full regional representations. For example, we're very proud this year that we have progressed on the element relating to the representation from the African continent. And I know this was one of the areas that we were lacking behind in terms of really addressing the injustice imposed on African countries when it comes to their representation in the Security Council. And I think we've really managed to move forward. Again, the context of the discussions is consistent of trying to achieve a specific goal, which is narrowing down the divergence in the debate and increasing the convergence. And I think this year we've managed at least to put the negotiations in the right track. As some of you know, that we've been able to deliver a document that is sort of a revision for what has happened in the last few years. But the revision this year really focuses on giving a bit of clarity to the process. And again, doing some progress, especially on the front of addressing the injustice imposed on African countries when it comes to Africa's representation in the Security Council. And of course, other aspects as well has been addressed. But we think that this year, hopefully the text will be adopted by consensus. We are in the process now of wrapping up the discussions and having a document to be delivered and to be passed through to the upcoming session of the General Assembly. But again, just to wrap, just to sum up what I wanted to point out too, there is a need to move the process of the reform of the Security Council forward. There is a lot of aspirations that the Council should come up with a format that addresses many aspects, including also, widening the debate, making sure that there is more transparency in terms of involvement of members who are not part of the Security Council, and widening the scope of it through more engagement, increasing the relationship between the Security Council and the General Assembly as well is very important at that stage. So these are some of the positive elements from the process this year.
Okay, thank you for updating us on that. And I definitely, Ambassador Hammoud, I definitely would love to get your thoughts on the reform process. Before I do, if I might be able to pick up on something that you said earlier, because gosh, I mean, there is so much to discuss in the region, but I think, you know, what we've seen in recent weeks with Israel, Palestine, and the fact that this story really, it spans the question of Palestinians. I mean, it spans the existence of the UN. So it is a great example to talk about. And I mean, I know you were saying just there that there has to be this continued focus on the two-state solution, which, as you well know, I mean, you know, decades of negotiations have failed to achieve that. In 1947, the UN General Assembly voted for the creation of two states for two peoples, the principle embedded in that resolution. So on that basis, does the Security Council, we're talking about Security Council reform, does the Security Council have to insist that on complete equality of rights and international law does that have to be the foundation of any solution to this issue, whether it's one state, two states, or something else?
Okay, thank you for this question. There were some efforts in the past few years to depart away from the two-state solution. It's unfortunate that this has been the case. There's two choices. There's no third choice in this. If you're going to have one state solution, it means a state, a binational state, where Arabs and Jews have equal rights. If this is the case, there'll be more Arabs and Palestinians west of the River Jordan than Jews by next year. So is it going to be an apartheid state, Israel? That's the question they have to answer. The second option is essentially a two-state solution. If you're going to have a two-state solution, then there'll be a Jewish and democratic state on one end and a Palestinian state that achieves the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people. There is no third solution. There is some literature and that's been going on since 1967, since the time of Golda Meir until now, which says that we don't need to have a Palestinian state. We can just transfer all the Palestinians outside of historic Palestine, the pre-1947 Palestine. Now, obviously, if you look at the deal of the century, it's part of this narrative, actually, which is having certain cantons without, with some self-rule, without any prospects for a state to be created, and then creating conditions conducive for the displacement of Palestinians outside of their homeland. This is not going to happen. They haven't left 100 years ago. They haven't left 70 years ago. They haven't left 10 years ago, and they will not move. They are staying there. So there is no alternative.
And
the only alternative is two-state solution.
And Ambassador Hammoud, I just want to get brief thoughts from yourself and Sheikha Alia on two final questions. Briefly, can I ask you, Ambassador, we're hearing Sheikh Alia talking about reform of the UN Security Council. The composition and functioning of the Security Council goes to the heart of the question on the relevance of the UN in today's world. Even if you enlarge the Security Council to reflect current geopolitical realities, it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't be used as an instrument for national interest, does it?
I appreciate all the thoughts that Sheikh Alia have done, and it's a pleasure to see you again after all these years, Sheikh Alia. We were in the council in 2014 and 2015, and the experience within the council is, as Jordan, where I was serving as deputy permanent representative then, it shows that there is the power of veto among the P5 is the issue. Even if you increase the number of membership within the council, I mean, there's some states, big states, powerful states, who say we also deserve a veto and a permanent seat on the Security Council. The problem is the veto. And how to get rid of it. Since the 50s, since the United for Peace resolution, people tried to go around the prerogative and the jurisdictions of the Security Council. But there is a pushback among the P5 to keep, for understandable reason, legitimate reasons, lawful reasons to keep the maintenance, the primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace security within the Security Council. And there's arguments for both. The issue is, how, these states, the P5, understand that their interest is to dispose of the veto when there is high stakes involved. It's not only that what I as a state have as a national interest, it's the interest of the international community. There is no solution. Otherwise, the UN would have resolved this long time ago. But there is ways by which the international community as a whole and the UN membership can express their views with regard to the reform of the Security Council and make the veto usage within the Council a rarity, or not a rarity, at least within a small scale. It won't disappear. It will continue. I think it's unfortunate that we have seen it increase in the last five years, especially after the events in Syria and Ukraine.
Well, indeed, and there's a great deal to discuss there. But Sheikh Alia, a final thought from you, because we started this discussion speaking about the pandemic. So maybe a final thought on that, because it really is one of the greatest challenges the UN has faced since its creation. We've spoken about reform of the Security Council. Has the pandemic accelerated the need for structural change in other parts of the UN, including major bodies like the Economic and Social Council and the high-level political forum overseeing the agenda for sustainable development? Do we need to see change elsewhere now as well?
Thank you so much, Mariam. And of course, as well, good to see Ambassador Mahmoud. We've worked together as well when he served in New York. So good to see you. Yes, of course. I mean, again, the needs arises to address other important UN bodies. And of course, we cannot conclude the discussion today without addressing the importance of strengthening one of the key bodies within the system that can address not only the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, but future crises and future, global health crisis. Again, of course, ECOSOC is one of the most central bodies within the system when it comes to its role in the UN development system. It is, of course, the only UN inclusive intergovernmental platform that is capable to engage and mobilize both governments, the UN system, civil society, and young people around the world. It has a unique mandate, again, to bring institutions, people, and issues together to promote collective actions when it comes to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I belong to one of those groups that really calls upon to the need to have a reformed ECOSOC, because a stronger ECOSOC will be able to address such a situation we are in today. If we have a stronger ECOSOC, an ECOSOC with teeth, that can be able to bring together governments and as well create this participatory approach and have more engagement of civil society and the private sector, we will be able not to only address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we will be able to have a smooth implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. we all recall that, COVID hit at a time when we were planning and starting the decade of action to reach the achievements by 2030. And of course, now COVID-19 has put us far behind from achieving those goals. Why? Because we need to, first of all, address the recovery plans, have more response systems in place to address the current impact of the COVID-19. But of course, ECOSOC is in the right place to do that. And I think probably to share with you, some of my thoughts on how we can, have an ECOSOC reformed in a way to address these challenges. We need, of course, to enhance the coordination function of ECOSOC, increase its ability to foster policy coherence, and improve ways to engage the private sector and civil society organization in its work. ECOSOC, of course, should also become the key platform for enhanced private sector participation. We need to further value the private sector unique expertise and access. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us that without the collaboration with the private sector, with the pharmaceutical companies, we would never been able to produce the vaccines in such a timely manner and be able to distribute them. So I think, again, we've been in the past, some countries were trying to restrict the role of the civil society and the private sector within ECOSOC. But today there is evidence that we can work together with them and we can provide the platform. And I think through a reformed ECOSOC, we can do that. And I think there is a momentum. Again, UN75 declaration has created the momentum. And now with the impact of COVID-19, I think we have a greater interest to bringing countries together who can collaborate and work towards a much better positioned ECOSOC to serve and to be fit for purpose.
Okay, well, thank you very much. On that note, we will conclude this first segment of our program today. I would like to thank Sheikha Alia and Ambassador Hamoud for joining us. I think we covered a fair bit of ground in that bit of the discussion. We could carry on, but we have to move on to the next segment. Thank you very much for joining us both. And I'm not sure if you will be able to hang around for the Q&A, which we'll have later. I will leave that to you. But for now, I will bring in the other speakers for the second part of our panel. So let me introduce them. And as I introduce you, please switch your camera and your audio on. So joining us now for this next bit, we have Dr. Abdul Fattah Mohammed from the Doha Institute Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. I'm also very pleased to introduce Ms. Shireen Shaheen, Director of the WANA Institute program. Also, we have Professor Karim Makdisi, Associate Professor of International Relations and Director of the Program in Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. And also joining us from Doha, Qatar, Mr. Mohammed Al-Jafari, Chairman of the Creativity Makers Center. So if I can ask all of you to join us, now.
Yes, we are there.
Oh, fantastic. You're all there. And you can take yourself off mute as well. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so thank you, all of you, for joining us. And just a quick reminder to those of you who want to submit questions, you can get them in using the Zoom's Q&A feature. We will put your questions. We'll have another quick round of questions and then we'll get to Q&A. So please make sure that you get your questions in there. Professor Karim Makdisi, if I can start with you, because we often talk about the UN as though it exists in a sort of vacuum in and of itself, but the reality is that it can only do what its member states empower it to do. It requires investment and political will. And unfortunately, that system hasn't worked out for the Middle East and North Africa. I mean, well, the Middle East and Africa as well, two of the world's most conflict-torn regions. Why has the UN failed the people of Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, and of course, the Palestinians?
Yes, hi, and thank you very much for the invitation from the organizers. Yeah, this is obviously an exceptionally important question, and I just wanted to add one thing before I get to the answer itself, which is it's really important to think about the UN in a sense as a dynamic body. It's not just the Security Council members, but it does exist in all of its different agencies, all of its different forms, from the humanitarians to the Save the Children types, to all sorts of things that we often forget about, obviously, when we're having big political discussions. And I do think that's important to recognize from the start. But to get to your answer, yes, I think it is, especially over the past decade or two. I think it's while analyzing the UN is extremely complex and there's a lot of nuance. I think in general, you had mentioned in the earlier panel, for instance, the question of Palestine. And it seems to me very clear that the United Nations, in that sense, has failed very much the Palestinian people in all sorts of ways. And one of the important ways to look at this is to look at the way in which the UN, the early part of the UN, the early decades, let's say, of the UN during the Cold War, in which the UN itself not only tested, but was actually shaped through the Palestine question and through the Arab-Israeli conflict. So we see, for example, that there were all sorts of institutions and norms that were kind of created out of that question. The very first refugee agency, UNRWA, was created to deal with the Palestinian refugees who were kind of cleansed out of Palestine through the 1947, 1948. The idea of the political role for the Secretary General Special Representative was also created out of that. The role of UN mediators was created out of this. The very notion of UN peacekeeping, which of course is not in the UN Charter itself, was created both in the observer mission types, and that's around the 1948, 49, the borders, and those missions still exist, but also the armed version, which happened around the 1956 war, when this kind of the famous UN peacekeeping doctrine, in fact, was created. The holy trinity of principles of consent and non-intervention and kind of use of force only in self-defense. So all these kinds of institutions, and later we see things like the responsibility to protect, all these kinds of norms and institutions come out of the UN and are interacted with the Arab region. And so this complexity of the relationship between the UN and the Arab world is really very important to bear in mind, that it's a two-way street. It's not just one way, but there's lots of resistances. There's lots of practices that happen and then come back to New York, come back, get reformulated, redone, and then sent back again. And it's this kind of interaction on a very regular basis. Now, for Palestine, just to get to this is a very obvious example, which is that in the early part, there was a plethora and hundreds of UN resolutions of all sorts that at the very least reaffirmed Palestinian rights to self-determinations, to a just settlement, to a just solution, to the right of return for refugees, and endless numbers of resolutions that came out of the UN. Whether or not they were implemented is a kind of a different issue, but there was plenty of resolutions and the reaffirmation of international law as the basis for the resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. In the post-Cold War period, you see that the UN politically and in security effectively takes itself out. It says, okay, I'm no longer going to be part of this. We're going to throw it to kind of, the US and other mediators and just say, let the Palestinians sort it out by themselves with the Israelis in a context in which the power imbalance was extremely huge. And that has led, I think, directly to the forms of violence and continued expulsions that we see today in Sheikh Jarrah and Jerusalem and other areas like this. So the failure, in that sense, of the UN to reaffirm and continue to reaffirm, not just in words, but indeed its commitment to international law and UN as the very basis of the resolution to adjust, I think meant that people failed in that sense. I think that's a very important example.
Okay, thank you very much for that, for those thoughts, Professor. And Shireen Shaheen, if I can come to you to get your thoughts on that. As the professor was saying, it's very important to bear in mind that it's not just about the political arm of the United Nations. There are many different agencies. You have the peacekeeping arm, you have many people that are working on the ground in conflict areas, engaging with local stakeholders and doing very important work, providing technical assistance, humanitarian assistance in places that are extremely dangerous. So you have all of that. I know that you are based in Amman, And you've made the case through research that resilience, it's about resilience, carrying capacity, and human dignity. All this is central to improving security for people. Can you tell us how that applies to UN reform, how you can take those ideas and concepts and reform the UN to strengthen its role in providing a peace and security for people in the MENA region?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. I want to start by saying what human dignity is. Human dignity is when an individual integrates, blends, and lives in peace and feels safe and secure, when she feels protected and trusted by the leaders, when she can see a bright future, when livelihoods are not threatened, when good health and education are available, when identity is protected, when she is in control over their trees, water, and air. This is what human dignity is. And that's why we call for the concept of human security at the WANA Institute. The WANA Institute is highlighting the concept of human security in order to reach the human dignity that we call for Palestinians, for Jordanians, for Africans, for everyone. The United Nations has failed us in reaching that. Now, I want to say that my advice to the UN, if I could say that, is to highlight the concept of human security. It was initially created or highlighted by the UNDP, and it is a preventive concept that pertains to security at the individual level rather than the communal level. So it focuses on diverse set of emerging security threats, which impinge on the comfort and well-being of the individual. So human security is pivotal in Jordan, in Palestine, in Lebanon for stability, and to reinforce the stability in societies and face the various drivers of conflict, whether occupation, leadership, any type of conflict that can happen in our area. So human security is broadly anchored in 7 main pillars. Let me explain more a little bit. It was determined by the UN Development Report in 1994. These 7 pillars are economic, food, health, environmental, personal, political, and societal security. These pillars are interrelated and integrated. Should one of these pillars develop or has a setback, they will all affect each other. I have to say that it's important to say that in the region, we lack knowledge and practical, scientific, and objective base that could help the local population deal with those issues. And in view of the importance of human security in promoting steadfastness in the region, it is duty to build a knowledge base concerning this concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And perhaps Dr. Abdul Fattah in Doha, if I can come to you. The UN75 declaration calls for enhancing the Secretary General's toolbox to prevent the outbreak, escalation, and recurrence of hostilities. That is a direct quote. And again, I mean, as we were saying, there's been a failure to prevent armed conflict in countries from Yemen to Syria to Afghanistan to Sudan. So let me ask you, how can the UN improve that toolbox? How can it use and perhaps even be more effective in using the mechanisms that it does have to prevent armed conflict and promote peace and security?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Mariam, and I thank all our partners for this wonderful event with distinguished panelists. I mean, and it's a timely discussion that we have to have basically, and engage in it. In terms of the toolbox in the hand of the United Nations, we all know now that the United Nations is expected to play the third party role in the Afghan peace process. And the Secretary General, Guterres, has already appointed a peace envoy for Afghanistan. And no one, of course, knows until now how the UN is going to fulfill such a role, you see, at this critical point of the history of this conflict since 20 years. The other thing is, we all know, at least for people working in conflict studies and peace studies, that when the primary actors are a bit of like, you know, having fatigue from conflicts, they pass that conflict to the UN to sort it out, and the burden becomes on the UN basically, and it is a shoulder to resolve the conflicts. Right now, of course, we know that there is 1 month to 3 months remaining for the foreign troops, the US troops, to withdraw from Afghanistan on the anniversary of 9/11. 2021, which is after 20 years, basically, from what has happened in Afghanistan. But the thing is that this time frame is very, very short for the UN basically to put the pieces together and make a jigsaw that can really affect the positive changes and make the impact that is needed for Afghanistan, basically. And at the same time, I have to mention something, which is that not only the period is not enough, we know as well that the Afghan crisis, the ones who are engaged in states are not the multilateral system, the global multilateral system, the UN and so on. And of course, we mention here notably and recognize the role of Qatar to get the US and Taliban agree on 2020 basically, and to facilitate the discussion and facilitate the possibility really of the Afghan Taliban political commission to have an office here and engage in some sort of discussion with the Afghan government. That's of course noted. That's well noted, well recognized. But at the same time, for the UN, when they start putting the pieces together in their toolbox, they need to coordinate with the mediators who have been engaged in this whole conflict since a long time. And at the same time, they need to coordinate and learn from the successes and the failures. This is just a key thing, as you know, and definitely the UN and its toolbox will need the support of the 5 permanent members in the UN Security Council to engage positively, despite, of course, their interests, and some of these interests might of course, collide, as we all know. And the other support to the UN when it resumes such a role is the support from the regional countries to Afghanistan, namely China, Russia, Turkey, Pakistan, and of course, Doha, Qatar is still, of course, supporting this whole process. This is if we take the example of Afghanistan. If we take another example, which is Sudan. Sudan, of course, now, after the revolution and the new regime, Sudan is in need of getting basically the pieces together because, of course, Sudan, as many other countries, have been impacted by COVID-19. And COVID-19, of course, has exacerbated the vulnerabilities, the fragilities, as we all know. And for such situation, I mean, the pull out of UNAMID, the peacekeeping forces from Darfur, probably is behind what has caused some sort of a conflict and violence at the tribal level in Western Darfur, as it has been reported probably 2 months ago. I think the need for the UN there is to really help conflict prevention, help to engage at the local level with civil society, and ensure that Sudan can really overcome the current challenges, including, of course, the economic challenge, and Sudan does not have the needed cash. Another issue is the issue of donors' fatigue. We all know that donors now have basically made less commitments than it was before for foreign aid assistance. I don't need to mention names of countries, but we can see that there is quite a fatigue, and commitments for international development and SDGs and the humanitarian needs are not like before. And of course, the foreign aid assistance is not at its best shape. But I think there is a need to really support the UN operations and the UN kind of support. The humanitarian financing has to come back to its better shape, better level. We know that the humanitarian wasn't at its good stage even before COVID-19. Yeah.
Well, so you make a number of points, and Mohammed Jafari, you've been very patient, and you've been very patient, and I want to come to you with a question, but I do want to pick up on something that we just heard from Dr. Abdul Fattah and put it to Professor Karim. Professor Karim, can I ask you on the issue of conflict resolution? Dr. Abdul Fattah said something really interesting, sort of along the lines of, well, you know, when you have a conflict and a situation that is in paralysis and seemingly intractable, it's basically the job that no one wants, and then it falls to the UN to try and find some sort of, I mean, is that a mentality or a sort of way of doing things that we are stuck in, when I suppose the reality is the UN can't really resolve a conflict if parties on the ground are not ready to do it themselves?
Yes, no, I think that's one of, I was alluding to the fact that it's impossible sometimes to come with very clear answers. So the UN does often get thrown in the deep end where there's persistent conflict, and the parties that are involved externally, by the way, as well as locally, don't have the means or the will to end it, and suddenly the UN has to come in and sort of resolve it, and everybody gets upset because, of course, it doesn't get resolved in a way that most of the parties want it to. But I would say that, sticking to the core ideas of the UN, sticking to the main resolutions, insisting that UN resolutions, that international law, that international humanitarian law would apply in these conflicts, is different than saying, I'm not going to take sides and I'm going to just ignore one side that is more powerful than the other and maybe committing war crimes or doing something else in the name of some form of impartiality. That's not how I see it. I think the impartiality applies to the core mission and the fundamental mandates of the way in which the UN kind of operates. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So this is important kind of thing to note.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed Jafari, you are on mute. If I can come to you. Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Now, we've been speaking about the importance of inclusivity and representation at the UN. And this has, the UN, to its credit, has conducted reports where they have shown that this is clearly a problem. Tell me, how important is it for the youth to be involved? When we look at issues, I mean, all sorts of global issues, I'm thinking particularly of climate change and the movement around someone like Greta Thunberg. We see that in some ways that sort of state-centric way of doing things at the UN, which goes back to the way in which it was built, is perhaps not in harmony with the world that we have today. How important is it for the youth and for civil society organizations to be embraced by the UN?
So years ago, Maslow have presented a very nice pyramid that we cannot ignore today, and that makes sense. When it comes to priorities, I'm sure that everyone knows that there are a lot of priorities. Actually, let's us talk about Arab youth. When it comes to education, how much percent they have access to education and knowledge empowerment and access to science, connectivity and internet technology, all these kind of things. Is it easy to have an access to the globalization issues and to know what is happening around? Or they will be stuck with the current situation and what's happening around them? Even when we talk about entrepreneurs, those youth, they need a lot of skills to just put themselves in a race I don't want them to compete, just at least to be able to see what's happening globally. Like, for example, today, at least the minimum requirements they need to have, and they need to speak 2 languages. This is something that will take a huge time of their life, as well when it comes to maybe accessing college and accessing universities. A lot of education material are outdated, and today they are being taught in universities. These kind of issues will for sure create a big problem comparing themselves with the market and what's happening around us. People today worldwide are tech savvy, and when we talk about tech, it means access to technology, to markets. People are able to buy new stuff. For example, when it comes to inventors and creative people, they need access to raw material, to devices that are not available in the region. Patenting those ideas as well. People cannot have access to get their ideas patented. This is something that we need to take a big and serious look at it, because a lot of ideas has been stolen from those youth. Access to financials, like what Dr. Abdel Fattah mentioned. When we talk about banking, and the number of youth who are unbanked is really huge. This is something that we should take a look at, and to see how to give them access to the financial systems. Venture capitals. I don't know if we have any venture capitals in Arab region. Maybe some in the Middle East, yes, we have some, but with a very limited access, selective to some people who are like maybe more to media and campaigns beside achieving realistic goals and KPIs. So these things, when we talk about United Nations and empowering youth, we need to make sure that we give access to those youth to a certain, at least minimum access, for example, traveling, visa, passports, migrations, accessing international universities. They have the right to live and to see whatever human today are living with. These technologies, these nice companies are starting, and the new unicorns, startups can't get access to those youth. So finalizing or summarizing what I want to say is, if we want to have a full chain from the idea stage to market distribution, we need to empower the full process. We need to focus on every element and give access to it, and give a uniqueness access to this chain from different aspects. Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you.
And one last thing, yes. Empowering women. Women is a very important aspect in this youth equation.
Oh, well, you've set up beautifully my next question to Shireen Shaheen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Because, I mean, I suppose there has been criticism that there is this gulf between what the UN pledges on diversity, race, gender, and then the way in which it's actually performed in all of these areas. Obviously, there is a need to get the youth more involved, and what advice? I mean, first of all, what advice would you give the youth that want to get more involved in the UN system, particularly in the Middle East, where you have a very young population? And we've seen, I mean, recently this sort of mass mobilization in around the Palestinians, and this determination to put that conversation back on the global agenda. But in general, what would be your advice to them? And also, how much more work does the UN have to do on equality for women?
Great, thank you. For youth, we were very impressed with the happenings, the recent happenings in Palestine. We thought that the youth have forgotten, and we if nothing happened during the past month, we are very happy that we know that the youth have not forgotten, that their parents have been cleansed, let's say, or evacuated, or deported, or imprisoned. So the youth, we used to say this is the young age of TikTok age, and apparently this TikTok age is working. I encourage all youth to continue what they are doing, to continue learning, to continue being exposed to what's happening in the world around them, and not to look inward. On the contrary, to look outward and learn what's happening in the world around them, where they can add to peace and safety to others. I want to also, more importantly, I want to build on Dr. Abdel Fattah's point about donor fatigue. I want to take it further and say I'm calling for the decolonization of funds, localizing the funds. I mean, when we are still looking at short-term and isolated initiatives. We're still looking at short-sighted and projects that are limited with impact. They are not presented in a developed framework of an official long-term vision that is participatory, that includes youth, local community, grassroots organizations, private sector. And that's why I call for that decolonization of funds that come to the region. In terms of women, I would have to say, despite the many and various donor interventions, UN and other, despite the many national strategies, despite the many new women departments, women-related agreements and resolutions, we remain fragile and vulnerable in the region. Women still earn less. Women have less savings. Women are owning less property and assets. In Jordan, for example, only 10% of land is owned by women, and only 23% of apartments are owned by women. Women still face challenges in the economic and social integration, challenges such as public transport, such as lack of child facilities, such as lack of flexibility of hours, working hours. Unemployment in Jordan, for example, is very high, and the women are trapped in the care sector. The majority work as teachers or nurses. They are hindered by the fourth industrial revolution, by the transition to green technology. They are hindered by the recession caused by the pandemic, as they have all gone into the informal sector, and their skills have not been developed to meet the new demands of the jobs of tomorrow. They are stuck in the jobs of today, and that's where a revolution needs to take place in terms of their skills and in terms of their education in order to move to the jobs of tomorrow. There's much more I can talk about women. We have so many studies on women, and these challenges that I have just listed are not only challenges, but they have a wide potential for reform, and they require policy change.
Can I ask you, I'm going to go to Q&A in a minute. I think we've got just 2 more minutes. Let me ask you one more thing, because we've spoken a great deal about violence, conflict. I was mentioning that obviously, that there is also a great deal of unemployment and poverty. This is a problem in the region, isn't it? The situation, that the inequality and the way, actually women are disproportionately affected by all the other issues that I mentioned. But what is the biggest obstacle facing women in the region, and what is the one thing that the UN should focus on? What would be your call for, one thing that could be done to help?
It's not one thing, but if you want me to specify one thing only, priority, it would be protection. We are working with women to, we push them to go to work, we push them to go to study, but we are not finding protection for them. We're calling for the UN resolution calls for 1325 for women, peace and security. We're asking women to get into security and peace and police, but we are not providing them with adequate protection at the same time that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Okay, fantastic. So, and thank you everyone. First of all, thank you to all of our speakers, Dr. Abdul Fattah, Professor Karim, Shireen and Mohammed. Thanks to all of you. A couple of questions now. So thank you very much for sending your questions in. I think Ambassador Hamoud is very kindly still around, but I will wait for him to make his way back to us. Professor Karim, can I ask a question of you? It's actually not my question, it's from the Q&A. It's a very good question. How do the Abraham Accords affect the Palestinian situation? So tell us about that.
Well, I think on the whole, you will have seen that I think the vast majority of Palestinians will have rejected the Abraham Accords in the sense that it doesn't incorporate their kind of demands inside Palestine itself. And I think what's interesting is the notion that what's been happening over the past few weeks and a couple of months now, especially, but it's been going for years, really is a repudiation of the Abraham Accords. Is to say that ultimately a resolution to the Palestine question and for the Palestinians is to deal with them on the level of a just settlement, of one where there's where they are being consulted, where their self-determination, where their human rights, where their right to stay in their homes without being, ethnically removed and ethnically cleansed, and all of this. This is the key to resolving the Palestine question. It's not having regional agreements that have been, the states can do as they wish, of course, but in terms of dealing with the Palestinians themselves, this has to be at the center of this kinds of resolution. So I don't see that they're going to go very far in resolving the conflicts. They may create other forms of networks and other forms of business opportunities and other forms of, realignment of geopolitical situation. But I don't think it's going to. I think it's been rejected by people on the ground and by I think the vast majority of people throughout the region.
Thank you, Professor Makdisi. I'm just seeing because you've made some interesting points, which would lead me very nicely to Ambassador Hamoud, but the ambassador is very busy and he might have already left us to get onto another Zoom meeting. So that's a shame, but it's okay because I have plenty of questions for all of you. Right, so let me just check some of the other questions that we have here, and Actually, this is an interesting one. Mohammed Al-Jafari, a good question for you. How will the 15% international corporate tax under consideration by the G7 contribute to overall cooperation between nations? I mean, obviously this is important because we've been speaking about, inequality and the division between developing countries and wealthier countries. And of course, we know multinational companies shift their profits to lower tax jurisdictions in order to avoid tax. Some people have said that a 15% international corporate tax rate is a step forward. Others say it doesn't go far enough. What do you think? Will it help cooperation?
Well, it's still not clear how is it going to help and how it is moving around, because we still haven't received any statistics or studies yet, nothing published on that matter since then. But when we talk about taxation, it is something that started even in the Middle East. Qatar has been lately discussing the taxes and implementing it on the youth as well, on entrepreneurs and startups. Hasn't been implemented, but are we sure that this is going to help the ecosystem? Is it something that's going to sustain the spirit of those young entrepreneurs? I doubt that we could have a clear answer for it right now, but it seems like it's going to be another obstacle on the entrepreneur journey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A question for Shireen Shaheen from Pel and Arson. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. The question, Shireen, is the MENA region is critical in the transformation to a climate-friendly global society, not least in moving from dependency on fossil fuel to renewable energy. What are the challenges and opportunities in this transformation?
I'm not an environmental expert. However, I can say from the studies that the WANA Institute has conducted that there is a tremendous opportunity for renewable energy. We have conducted a study on various countries in the Arab world, Morocco, Palestine, Egypt, Lebanon, I cannot recall. And we looked at each of the countries and the opportunity of transiting into renewable energy, and they all had great potential. We have great sunshine, we have a lot of wind, so renewable energy is a big possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Abdel Fattah, if I can ask you this question from Corey Buat on Afghanistan. Now, regarding Afghanistan, Turkey has perhaps been the most important nation in helping cope with the Afghan refugee crisis, but Turkey can't carry this out alone. Is there international resolve to address this?
Yeah, I think there was an interest that Turkey to have, with the support of the United Nations, as long as we are talking about the United Nations, to convene a dialogue between the Afghan government and the Taliban. But this didn't take place because the Taliban basically didn't show up and any interest to join. And of course, the inter-Afghan peace talks are quite challenging, and they might have some surprises that we don't know about yet. For anyone who's observing how this kind of, what's going to look like the future of the inter-Afghan peace process and what's going to take place. The Turkish government showed quite an interest and commitment to help, and as well showed an interest to help along the Russians and the Chinese and the Pakistani, basically, to help the Afghan people to move toward the stability and, of course, toward peace. And I can't answer whether there will be any future platform after the foreign troops have came out of Afghanistan, except inside Afghanistan. Hopefully, that the Afghan parties come together, all sides come together, and with the support of the UN as well as the regional governments, and definitely, of course, with the support of the like of a country like Qatar, to really support that Afghanistan come out of this challenge. Until now, we haven't seen any indication that there will be a Turkish evident role in terms of the next phase of what we have been observing.
Right, and actually that leads quite nicely to my next question. It would be interesting actually to get everyone's thoughts on this, particularly in light of we see the negotiations taking place in Doha, but which is very interesting. Is that likely to be the future, that we will see more of a concentration on a bilateral in terms of conflict resolution? Is it something that's more effectively channeled through bilateral negotiations, regional organizations such as the AU, the Shanghai Cooperation Council? Obviously, you have the Arab League, the GCC. Professor Maktisi, if I could start with you on that. What are your thoughts on the level of engagement and collaboration between the UN and regional organizations?
Yes, thank you, Mariam. Sorry, the Wi-Fi is connecting, so I can't hear everything. I think basically that this level from the kind of global to regional connection is going to increase over the coming years. There's been a lot of growth in kind of regional institutions, and this is not the Arab League as much, but there's a number of other regional institutions where they're dealing with environmental, sustainable development, energy, all sorts of mechanisms, and that includes, of course, various conflict resolution type mechanisms. And that's going to have to increase. Now, whether this can be pushed into the realm of peacekeeping would be interesting. We haven't had this very much. Clearly, this is something in the African Union in Africa. There's quite a bit of kind of hybrid models between various African countries and associations and the UN itself. In the Arab world, we haven't really seen that yet. And it'll be very interesting, under the guise of the United Nations mandate, of course, we haven't seen that very much. And it would be really interesting to see for the coming years, if the geopolitics kind of were to sort itself out through the negotiations that are taking place, secretly or otherwise. I think it would be very interesting if that leads to a form of regional agreement where, on the one hand, there is an understanding that the wars must end and that sort of justice for each people and within the Arab region can be pushed. And from that, it would be interesting then to see if the mechanisms that have begun through environmental and energy and other forms of technical cooperation can extend really more to the political and to the security realm. But it has to be done on a basis where there is not a kind of very top-down, a very kind of controlled relation. This is what's missing at this stage.
So Shireen, can I get your thoughts on that? Because I want to put this question to all of you from Reem Al-Hababi on the level of collaboration between the UN and regional organizations in the Middle East, for example. Is that something you would have? Do you have confidence in those organizations?
It's difficult to answer this question. It's difficult to say whether we trust or not trust, or we have confidence or not. We're always hopeful that the cooperation will happen and no one will be working in silos because that will not take us anywhere. So that's my answer.
Yes, and Dr. Actually, Mohammed Jafari, if I can come to you, what are your thoughts on that? I suppose the point about Reem Hababi's question is that it isn't just that it would all be delegated to regional organizations, that any sort of process or negotiation for conflict resolution, even if it's being conducted by those who are closer to parties on the ground, that have a greater understanding of the region, that it would still happen under the auspices or the supervision of the UN?
Actually, I'm against this spirit that we always put things on others and we just want to delegate all our situations for third parties to take a deal and to take an action on it. If we want to do change, we need to act, and we need to act now. And this is a responsibility that we should put in our shoulders, not by putting it and pushing it away to third parties and just claiming. Running panels and starting to talk online or on Twitter, on any organization, maybe writing an article or going to YouTube and just claiming that our problems are out there and someone should come and fix and repair and study our issues is not the spirit that I'm trying to maybe to work through. We need to change things. There is a say that if you have a dark, don't curse the dark, light a candle. So Mariam, for example, when you have an issue with someone, you need to deal with it. And these are our issues. We need to take them seriously. We need to work through our problems and to start putting roadmaps that will fix our situations, and with the real projects, not only handouts and maybe more theoretical issues. So that's my point. And thank you, Reem Al-Ahbabi, for sharing this question. It is really delightful to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for making that point. And Dr. Abdul Fattah, then let me ask you, obviously, the capacity of the UN and its scope and all the issues that it deals with, it was vastly expanded since its initial founding. Does the UN need for regional organizations to get more involved, and are those sort of initiatives likely to be more successful if those organizations have the familiarity and the trust of local actors?
Yeah, okay. This debate of relationships between the United Nations as a global framework and the regional organizations is quite there for some time. At least when I was like an independent advisor for the World Humanitarian Summit, we have seen initiatives where the like of the United Nations humanitarian coordination, meeting with the African Union, the IGAD, and the Asian as well regional organization, and the Arab League and the OIC, in order to coordinate, at least at the level of, as Dr. Karim mentioned earlier, at the level of disasters, for example, response, or the level of what is related to sustainability, climate change challenges, and so on. And right now, of course, this kind of coordination and working together between the UN and the regional organization is much needed during this COVID-19 pandemic. Because there is no way that if some people are vaccinated and others are not vaccinated in one corner of the world, that the world is going to be safe. So without such a coordination between the regional and the UN, of course, there will be no exit out of this. The other element here is regional organizations are not at the same level. And they have, of course, various agendas, different agendas and different priorities. And this needs, like, a continuous dialogue, you can say, between, for example, the European Union with the UN, as well as, say, the regional kind of organizations together to discuss issues relevant and issues important. We have seen some sort of a dialogue, for example, taking place between the GCC and the European Union for quite some time on, of course, issues of trade and issues of economy and so on. And we have seen examples of such kind of cooperation as well, for example, between the IGAD and the UN and other regional organizations. Is it sufficient? Is it enough? It is not enough. We need more of this in order to really strengthen the global governance as well as the regional governance. That could be a quick answer. Otherwise, the answer for such question would be quite long.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that was a good note to conclude on. I think it is obviously focused a great deal on the United Nations, but as Professor Karim was saying, the growth of regional organizations and local actors in terms of resolving, in terms of conflict resolution, also very important. I want to thank the global audience for participating today, for contributing your questions and ideas. I hope we can continue this conversation in the weeks and months ahead. I think we did well in terms of the ground covered. I think we've looked at many of the problems around process and structure, but I think it's also clear that the UN is only as effective as its members want it to be. And I think that's the important point. And I think for all the obstacles that are there, it is still the only institution that people look to for solutions to global problems and for conflict resolution, or perhaps just for creating that space for dialogue and engagement. I think we need that spirit of cooperation and generosity and awareness of what is happening in the world. And I think connecting through conversations like this is definitely an important part of that. So thank you again to Sheikh Alia and Ambassador Hamoud, and also to Dr. Abdul Fattah, Shireen Shaheen, Professor Karim Makdisi, and Mohammed Al-Jafari for joining us there. Appreciate it. Also want to thank the team that prepared today's program, a very hardworking bunch of people, including Stimson partners at the Doha Institute Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, the West Asia North Africa Institute, the American University of Beirut, and of course the Stimson Center. And I think there will be a brief report that is being prepared to highlight some of the key insights and recommendations from today's program. So thank you once again for joining us and for your commitment toward taking the UN75 declaration forward in 2021. I hope we can do this again. Bye for now.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Thank you very much.